Soon afterwards, ANDRZEJ came up to the window and told me that I had to be out the next morning and back in Block 15. I told him that all was good, but I was not leaving alone, but with Edek. Initially, Yashik was shocked, but when I told him that Edek was a fine lad, it only took him a moment to regain his composure and his always cheerful expression. Well, what to do? In the evening of that day, Edek started the scene, throwing a tantrum and complaining to the blockman, saying that there was no place here for the Poles and he did not want to be here anymore, and that he was going to leave to go to the camp the next day. The blockman, a German, liked Edek and started to calm him down, saying that there was no need for him to abandon such a good job as a warehouseman, and that he was not going to let him go in the first place because here in the warehouse there was little to do and plenty of food. Edek refused to listen, claiming that he was persecuted for being a Pole. Finally, the blockman lost his patience. "Fine, go wherever you want, you hothead." I could hear the echo of this row all the way to the room where I was resting. For many hours, the room foreman and flaggers from the entire block were coming to 172, Janusz Młynarski, asking one another what might have made Edek abandon such a good job. Since they had seen Edek coming to me, they were asking me as well about the possible causes of his departure. I said, "Oh, he's young, still reckless." I spent the next night in the same bed and dreamt about horses again. I dreamt that the wagon carrying me and some other friends had 2 horses in the front, but also 3 more horses harnessed in front of them. The horses cantered with ease, but all of a sudden the wagon went straight into a patch of dense mud. The horses struggled to keep moving forward, but eventually managed to get the wagon out of the mud and back on track. Monday morning, the second day of Easter holidays, Edek brought me a note, etc., moving me to Block 15. He had a similar paper as well. They were both obtained with the help of colleague 173, Władysław Fejkiel. I got out of bed, put on my clothes, which were stored in a small room adjacent to the patient's hall, and, accompanied by Edek, went to Block 15. We entered the block's office to report to the blockman, a German. The mood was clearly festive. The blockman, clearly having already tested some vodka, was avidly playing cards with the capos. We stood to attention and reported efficiently and by the book our assignment to this block. The blockman said in German, "You can clearly see that they're old numbers. It's a pleasure to hear them report." He brightened up, but then he suddenly frowned. "Why are you coming to my block?" "We're bakers." "Ah, okay, bakers. Well, so be it," the blockman said, coming back to his cards. "Does the capo of the bakery know about this?" "Jawohl. We have talked to him already. He will accept us." We had not even seen the capo of the bakery yet, but we decided to deceive all the camp's authorities anyway, and go all the way. "Okay, give me your zetos and go to the hall." We gave him the transfer cards from Block 20 to Block 15, and went to mingle with the bakers. Yashik was already waiting for us, but prudently did not approach us immediately. We stood in front of the capo and told him that we were bakers, that we knew how to work in a mechanical bakery. One was just about to be launched, and that we were moved to Block 15, and that the blockman knew us, even though he had just met us a second ago. That we were old numbers, and we were not going to embarrass him at all. The capo, who was sitting behind the table, was clearly surprised and confused, but before he could decide on anything, Yashik was already by his side, whispering into his ear. The capo smiled, but did not say anything yet. Later on, Yashik told us what he had said to the capo at that moment. "Capo, These two are just losers, about to regret it. They think that the bakery is some light stuff and they're going to just eat bread and do nothing. Capo, put them on night shift, and I'll teach them a lesson. He pointed at his huge fist, that after the first night they'll have had more than enough of the bakery. In the meantime, we gave an apple, some sugar, and some preserves to the capo, all taken from a package that had been sent to me from home. The capo looked at Jacek with a smile, then at the apple and sugar. Maybe he was trying to silently assess us, hoping for the prospect of getting more packages in the future. Then he just looked at us and said, "Sure, let's see what sort of bakers you are." The bell calling for the roll call scheduled to toll a couple of minutes before 11 a.m. because of the holiday interrupted the conversation with the capo and prevented us from talking to Janek. The roll call went smoothly and without any incidents. No prisoners were missing for now. Standing in the row, I was only thinking about the fact that if everything went right, this would be my last roll call in Auschwitz. I calculated that I must have seen about 2,500 of them. Such a great scale for comparison over the course of all these years at all the different blocks. Yes, things in the camp were consistently getting more and more lenient. After the roll call, the three of us gathered on the top of the bunk beds in the baker's hall and talked loudly about completely neutral things or food parcels, as there were strangers all around us. From time to time, however, we exchanged more meaningful messages. Jacek, who had become friends with Edek pretty much immediately, pretended to only be interested in us because of our food parcels. We had to go to the bakery that very night, because the state of general confusion among the camp's authorities that we created could not be maintained for too long. Besides, I had to be invisible to the fellow inmates of Block 6 and for the employees of the packagery as well, because they had already seen me back at the camp healthy, and such news could interest the capo and the chief of the packagery. I could share Oleg Alexander Bugajski's fate. We could also expect a conversation about us between the capo of the bakery and the blockmen. It would become very clear that neither of them knew us, and so we had to act quickly and overcome all the obstacles. The night shift was only comprised of 8 bakers. More of them were not necessary. This was reported on the gate in the Blockenführerstube and could not be changed, or at least it was beyond our power to change it. The night shift was manned by the prisoners who could not trade places with anyone. The good news was Jacek was already working there. The bad news, we needed 2 more places. How could we convince the bakers without raising their suspicion to skip their work that night and let us take their places instead? They were suspicious and feared for the security of their positions. Who knows? Maybe we were good bakers. We never said we were not, and the capo would kick them out of the bakery, taking us instead. We explained that a mechanical bakery was soon going to open and that we were all going to be needed anyway. We said that we were old numbers and we had no problems with finding pretty much any job, especially since apparently the job in the bakery was not all that great and easy. We were going to go there just once, see what kind of work it was, and not ask for more. We would find another job instead. It is difficult to list all the arguments, all the methods we tried, while having to pretend at the same time that we were not really too hell-bent on that, and producing gifts like sugar, gingerbreads, apples. We had given away all the parcels we had except for a small box of honey that I received from home. It was difficult to make progress. We decided a long time ago that once we had set foot in the bakery, there was no turning back, because for changing the commando arbitrary, I would surely be sent to the SK, and besides that, our lack of Professionalism as bakers would be discovered pretty quickly. We would be kicked out of the bakery and never taken for a job like that again. But in order not to come back, we had to leave first. And we still had no place in the night shift. Around 3 p.m., one of the bakers finally agreed to give his place to us for that night. Now, we just needed another one. In the meantime, I was collecting some things from my friends. I went to Block 6 very carefully for stuff that I needed, allegedly to take it from Platoon Leader 40, Tadeusz Szydlik. Block 18A, who was sick at the time and who had known about my plan. I changed my shoes twice in his presence. I visited Lieutenant 76, Bernard Świerczyna, Block 27, who gave us Edward Ciesielski, and me warm underwear, navy blue skiing trousers, which we later put on underneath our regular trousers. Colleague 101, Witold Kosztowny, Block 28, gave me a navy blue windproof jacket. We were running out of time, and we still needed the second spot in the bakery. When I came running with a pair of high boots, which were quite uncomfortable because they did not fit me, I almost bumped into the senior of the camp. I left the boots in the hallway of Block 25 by the door of the blockman 80, Alfred Włodarczyk, and due to the lack of time, I did not try to explain anything. When leaving the building, I ran into Captain 11, to whom I cordially bid farewell again, without explaining anything. I changed partially at Block 22A, in the presence of Colonel 122, Teofil Dziama, Captain 60, Stanisław Kazuba, and Colleague 92, Wacław Weszka. Those lying on the top of the bunk beds upon seeing my quick movements when putting a windproof jacket and skiing trousers under my regular striped outfit nodded with understanding. Captain 60, Stanisław Kazuba, uttered his favorite saying with humor, "Oh, not good." After that, I bid farewell to my colleague 59, Henryk Bartosiewicz, who gave me some dollars and marks. The rest of the preparations were made on the top bunk bed of my colleague Lieutenant 98, identity unknown. Officer Cadet 99, identity unknown, slept like a baby at the time, and so I refrained from waking him up. We waited in Block 15 till it was several minutes past 5 p.m., until we finally found a baker who either wanted to make friends among the old numbers, rich inmates, or maybe wanted to grab some rest, whatever. Be that as it may, we won his trust. He believed us when we said that we were not going to take away his job and agreed to help us. We were all ready at 6 p.m. ANDRZEJ changed into his civilian clothing, acquired some time ago from Lieutenant 76, Bernard Świerczyna. Since he, as the Unterkapo, was allowed to go out to work outside the camp in civilian clothing, he had bright red stripes painted along his back and waist and on his pants, so the prisoner could not escape as he would be visible from afar. Nobody knew, of course, that these stripes were painted by Colleague 118, identity unknown, using paint that dissolved in water and not in varnish. At 6:20 p.m., SS-man shouted loud from the gate, "Bäckerei!" This was the signal for all of us who belonged to the night shift in the bakery to run out of Block 15 and sprint towards the gate. It was a sunny day. The camp was in a cheerful and festive mood. The prisoners were strolling about. On my run to the gate, I encountered several colleagues who looked at me with a gaze of the greatest bewilderment, pondering where could I possibly be going with the bakers while having such a good job in the packagery. I recognized the faces of Lieutenant 20, Jan Kupiec, and Second Lieutenant 174, Jan Olszowski, but I was not afraid of them. I smiled at them. They were my colleagues. At the gate, we formed 2 rows ready to march out. To the very end, we were afraid that one of the bakers who traded their places with us might change his mind and show up. Then one of us, one of the new ones, would have to stay. We would both have to go along because even if we had wanted to cancel the escape, it was not doable anymore. Not at the gate. But there were 8 of us, the exact number. We were guarded by 5 SS men. The Schadführer counted us through a small window of the Blockführerstube. He uttered towards our guards, "Passt auf!" Did they figure it out? No. There was another reason. It was Monday, the day of changing the composition of the baker's guard squad for the entire upcoming week. We moved on. I thought that I had passed through the gate so many times, but never like this. Now I knew I could not return. This very reason was enough for me to feel joy and wings of a sort. But taking off was still pretty far off. We marched by the tannery. It was a long time since I was there. While passing by, I looked at the buildings and the courtyard, recalling all my works here and colleagues. Some of them were already dead. We split at the junction of our road from the camp to another road leading to the town. 2 bakers and 6 SS men took the road to the right towards the bridge to the smaller bakery. The reason for such a disproportionate escort for these 2 bakers and our oddly small escort, the 6 of us and only 2 SS men, was that those 3 SS men intended to indulge in some holiday drinking. We marched to the left. Finally, I saw the greater of the 2 bakeries, the day shift of the bakers going out to meet us midway, the door menacing, reinforced, towering, and the battlefield for our lives that night. Having entered the bakery, we went to the left. Coal was stored there, in a separate room. We stored our belongings there as well, stripping naked because of the high temperature. The place was pretty dark. We put our things separately, dividing them into stuff that we had to take and stuff that was to be left. Striped clothing. The smaller of the 2 SS men guards, as if smelling a rat, started to examine the door, nod his head, and say that it was not all too sturdy. Silver-tongued ANDRZEJ started to persuade him with a smile, convincingly arguing that it is opposite. The door was heavy, reinforced with metal, with a gigantic lock, opened only by a key attached to the SS man's belt, and the spare key hanging in a cavity in the wall behind a glass that would have to be broken to get it. The SS man's suspicions were maybe caused by an inkling of some sort, but they might equally have been caused by the new guard's eagerness to demonstrate their commitment to duty. From that point of view, Monday was not the luckiest of days. At the end of the week, the SS men were somewhat used to the workers, and not as alert. The new set of guards was advantageous due to having arrived here along with me and Edward Ciesielski, for the first time, so they did not know that we were here for the first time as well. They made no distinction between watching us and the old bakers. What were we doing in the bakery? Civilian bakers, also working 2 shifts and coming here from the town, were in charge of supervising and baking of the bread. We had quotas of bread loaves that we had to bake during the night. Should a team of bakers fail to achieve their quotas, they would go straight to the bunker, civilian bakers and inmates alike. Because of that, there was a great rush in the bakery. We had to fill all the ovens 5 times and empty them 5 times during the night. We were supposed to try leaving the bakery after the second batch of bread, because it would not have been too early after the first one. In reality, the first and second, third, and fourth batches were already done, and we still could not leave. Just like when one plays solitaire and needs to keep shuffling the cards to succeed. Also here, crossing the paths of the bakers, going for flour, sawdust, coal, water, transporting ready loaves further complicated by the paths of the SS men standing guard. All these things had to click and fall into place, aligning themselves in a way that gave us access to the door without being seen by either the SS men or the bakers. Except in this game of solitaire, we were playing for our lives. We were locked in the bakery because we had to do a job that had to be performed quickly and without hampering the other bakers. We were dripping with sweat from the stifling heat. We were drinking water by the bucketful. We were trying to fool our guards and other bakers by pretending to be absorbed in work. In our own eyes, we were more like animals locked in a cage, thrashing around, trying to the full extent of our wits to align all the conditions necessary to leave that night. The hours were passing. The solitaire was not going well. Things were getting mixed up. Leaving was not an option just yet. The situation looked good one moment, only to go awry the next. Our nervous tension would ebb and flow. We could see the door. The SS men were going back and forth, approaching the very door itself. Opening the window secured with a lock was not an option either. There was always someone right by it. Midnight Monday had passed, and Tuesday had begun. This led to some improvement in the circumstances. One of the SS men laid down and fell asleep, or at least pretended to be asleep. In any case, he remained stationary. All the bakers were exhausted as well. When the fourth batch of bread loaves was ready around 2 a.m., the bakers took a longer break and started to eat. The three of us had no rest. ANDRZEJ, was already changing his clothes in secrecy. Edward Ciesielski, and I were trying to mask his movements by carrying around with fake eagerness coal and water, preparing them for making the final batch of bread. In reality, we were preparing ourselves for the ultimate effort, leaving the camp. At one moment, when the SS man was approaching the door to the hall, Janek, knowing that the SS man would not return before 2 or 3 minutes, quickly twisted the screw's nut. It was no match for Yasho's iron hands. The screw with the hook fell out. When the SS man came back, Yasho disappeared in the cell for coal for a while. We were walking here and there with the wheelbarrow transporting coal. During the next round of the SS man's trip away from the door, Yasha quickly and silently opened 2 upper and 2 lower bolts. We, going back and forth with our wheelbarrows, took turns in covering him. All the bakers were exhausted and either sat or lay down in the great hall. The bolts took more time than the nuts. Yashik, already having changed clothes, entered the lavatory right by the door. The SS man did not notice. Perhaps he, being a newbie himself, he thought that changing clothes at the crack of dawn was a regular thing. Until this point, things were going well. Suddenly, however, either prompted by the inkling or maybe without giving it a single thought, the SS man approached the door, stood right by it with his face maybe some half a meter from it, and started to examine it. I put down my wheelbarrow even though I was some 4 meters away from him. Edek also froze in fear, rooted to the spot by a pile of coal. We were just waiting for the SS man's loud scream as a signal to jump at him, capacitate, and tie him up. Why did he not notice anything? Did he even have his eyes open? Maybe he was dreaming about something. I could never understand it. I assumed that he must have given it a lot of thought as well the next day in the bunker. In any case, he just turned around and walked towards the ovens. When he was some 6 meters away from the door, Yashik sneaked out of the lavatory. I jumped silently to fetch our stuff, and a second later, both of us were pushing the door. At that moment, Edek sneaked past behind one SS man, approached the bed where the other SS man was sleeping, and slashed the cables in 2 places with a knife, taking a piece as a souvenir. The door was bending under our pressure, but refused to give way. The SS man was going away from us. 8 meters, 9 meters. We pressed the door even more, and it bent even more as well, but still refused to yield. We never opened them before, and therefore had no guarantee that they would finally do so. If we had been able to feel fear at that moment, we should have been covered in cold sweat, but we did not have time for that. In the meantime, Edek jumped from the SS man's bed to the coal storage for his stuff. Jacek doubled the effort. All of my nerves were strained, but the door still prevented passage. We pushed with all our strength, and suddenly, without a sound, the door gave way. A chilly gust of air hit our overheated heads. The stars blinked to each other in the sky, as if trying to say something. All this somehow fitted into the blink of an eye. A jump into the darkness, and a run. Jacek, then me, then Edek. A hail of bullets followed us. It's difficult to describe how fast we were running. The bullets did not hit any of us. We were shredding the night air to pieces with our quick movements of arms and legs. When we were about 100 meters from the bakery, I started to yell, "Jacek! Jacek!" But Jacek was running straight ahead like a racing horse. If I could catch up with him, grab his arm. The distances between the 3 of us were identical. We were all running at the same speed. 9 shots had been fired behind us, and then silence. I assumed the SS man must have grabbed the phone. The one who was asleep surely must have been completely disoriented for the first minute. I wanted to stop Jacek, for, according to my plan of the route, we were supposed to run at an acute angle to the direction we had actually taken. It was possible to achieve that after some 200-300 meters. Jacek slowed down. I caught up with him, and so did Edek. "Well, what is it?" asked Jacek, panting heavily. "Now? Nothing, I guess," I replied. "You said that you had a plan where to go next." That was right. Indeed, I had a plan. I wanted to get across the Soa River, walking on its other side into the opposite direction towards the camp, and then further south towards Kente, on the other side of the river. But Jacek's run north changed everything. It was too late to turn back now. It was past 2 a.m. We had to hurry. "What now?" asked my colleagues. "Nothing. Let's get dressed," I told Edek. "I'll lead the way." The 2 of us were almost naked in our swimming trunks, with bundles of clothes under our arms. Up to that point, we had been running at some distance from the river, but along the Soa towards north. Now, after changing our clothing and hiding our striped trousers carefully in the bushes, we took these with us by mistake. I led us to the riverbank, the left one, and then we hid in the bushes, further towards the north. Edek, upon being asked if we had a package of powdered tobacco, said that he did, but lost everything when we were running. Should the dogs be released after us, they would surely lose our scent, smelling only this tobacco instead. I dried and powdered this tobacco a long time ago, back in the days of carving spoons tannery, from where we planned to prepare an escape route for some colleagues one day. While it got spilled a bit too quickly now, it would cover a bit our footsteps. Not changing the once assumed direction, we encountered a fork in the river. The Soa River flows into the Vistula at this point, but just before that, there was a railway bridge over the Soa. On the right, according to our information, the bridge was already guarded. Tomek Serafiński. "Where are you going?" asked Jacek. "Don't say a word. There's no other way, and we have very little time. We're taking the shortest possible route." We were approaching the bridge. I was leading. The soles of my shoes were made of rubber. Yashik followed about 10 to 15 steps behind me, Edek at the end. Very carefully observing the guards hot in front of the bridge from the left side, I climbed the railway embankment on the bridge. My colleagues followed. Walking silently, we started to move rather quickly on the bridge. We covered a third, then a half. We were approaching the other side, up to the end of the bridge. Till now, we did not encounter any obstacles. Finally, at the end of the bridge, we quickly jumped to the left from the embankment into the field or meadow of some kind. Surprisingly for us, crossing the bridge was no hardship. The guards must have been having a good time in good company at Easter. Further on the left side of the rails, I turned to the east along the Vistula. Finding our way was easy. The sky was full of shimmering stars. We already felt free to some extent, but there was still some danger between us and the feeling of complete freedom we started to run across. We left the town of Oświęcim on our right. We jumped over trenches, ran across roads, and plowed fields and meadows. We were getting closer to the Vistula, and then further from it again, depending on how it twisted and turned. It was not until later that we could truly appreciate how much a man can endure when all his nerves are put to work. We crossed plowed fields, going uphill, slid down the concrete reinforced slopes, climbing the edges of some canals like cats. A train caught up with us and went further on. Finally, after several kilometers, we thought it was 10, but in reality it was slightly less. We spotted fences, blocks, watchtowers, and wires ahead. Rising from beyond the hill, there was a camp before us and the crawling light of spotlight that we knew so well. Initially, we were simply frozen by this sight, but soon enough we realized that it had to be a sub-branch of our camp, the so-called Buna. There was no time for changing the direction of our march. Dawn was already breaking, coloring the sky. Having hastened our steps, we started to flank the camp from the left. We hit the wires. We were sliding down and climbing back up the slopes. We crossed the canals by a footbridge. In one place, very carefully, we moved on a footbridge over which, as the foamy water was overflowing, we bypassed the wires in the water. Ultimately, we left this camp behind us as well. We reached, still capable of running, the bank of Vistula River and started moving forward along its bank, at the same time looking for prospective places to hide during the day, just in case. It was almost daylight. We had no real cover. The dark line of the forest blackened the horizon far away. It was already very bright. There was a village right by the river bank. We saw some boats, the property of the villagers, floating on the water. I decided to take a boat over the Vistula. They were docked at poles with chains. The chains had padlocks on them. We inspected the chains. One of them was made of 2 pieces jolted by a bolt. Yashik produced a spanner, no more than a piece of an iron bar with a hole for the screw's nut, which he had used to unscrew the bolts in the bakery. A coincidence surprised us again. The spanner fitted. We unscrewed the nut and the 2 parts of the chain fell apart. The sun was rising. We got on the boat and took off. Someone could have come out from one of the houses only several dozen steps away at any moment. Over a dozen meters from the other shore, the boat hit the sandbank. We did not have the time to push it. We jumped into the water and went further on foot, waist deep in water. The body and the joints, hot from running the entire night, reacted. We did not feel anything just yet. Quickly jumping onto the other riverbank of the Vistula. 2 kilometers from us, there was the black tract of forest. The forest, my beloved forest. I missed it terribly for several years. Was our salvation there. The first true cover that could reliably hide us. I can't say that we ran towards that salvation. We did not have the strength to run. We walked at a quick pace, but had to slow down from time to time due to the lack of strength. The sun was shining brightly. We could hear the whir of the motorcycles in the distance, maybe even in pursuit of us, and we walked slowly. Edek and I were wearing clothes that, while somewhat suspicious from close-up, from a distance could easily pass for dark silhouettes, not out of context for their surroundings. However, the red stripes on Yashik's beautiful suit made him very noticeable from a distance. Some people working in the field were to be seen out in the distance. They must have spotted us. The forest was slowly getting closer. A weird thing, for the first time in my life, I caught the scent of the forest from the distance of 100 meters. Our senses caught this powerful aroma, the most beautiful twitter of the birds, a humid whiff, the smell of raisin. The gaze wanted to wander inside of this close but mystery of the woods. We crossed the threshold of the first trees and laid ourselves down on the soft moss. Lying on my back, I was sending a thought far above the treetops into the sky, a thought that transported happily into a huge question mark, a metamorphosis. What a contrast with the camp in which I feel like spending thousands of years. The pines were rustling, their giant tops swaying gently. We could see azure scraps of sky between the branches. Brilliance of dew shone on the blades of grass and the leaves of bushes. The sun penetrated the canopy here and there with its golden rays, brightening up thousands of tiny beings. The world of beetles, flies, butterflies, world of birds, which, just like thousands of years ago, still had its own rhythm. And yet, despite so many sounds, there was a great silence. The great silence, isolated from the humdrum hustle and bustle, from all the villainy of men, the silence without humans. We did not count. We were merrily on our way back to earth, only to be counted among the multitude. Oh, how glad we were not to see people yet. We decided to stay away from people for as long as possible. It would be a difficult task to remain away from people for too long. We had nothing to eat. For the moment, we were not hungry. We ate forest sorrel. We drank water from a stream. We were enchanted by everything. The whole world was beloved to us, only not the people. I had a small box of honey that had been sent to me from home, and a teaspoon. In turns, I was giving a spoonful of honey to Yasho and Edek. While lying down, we discussed the events of that night. Yashik was bald, so he did not need any headgear. Edek and I had shaved heads. In order to hide the lack of hair from people, we took 2 civilian caps from the baker's stuff back in the bakery, but Edek lost his cap during our run. Now he had to put a bandana on his head, and for that reason we dubbed him Evunia. Yasho in turn called himself Adam, and seeing some green branch picked a surname Gałązka, Twiggy. It was perfectly fitting considering he weighed about 90 kilograms. After Yasho's suit was washed in the stream in order to get rid of the red stripes, and after the 4 banknotes found in my shoes were dried, we marched again, heading east, going through the woods, jamming through small patches of open fields or avoiding some larger ones by skirting the forest's perimeter. The rule was, as far from people as possible. Just before the very evening we had a little alteration with the gamekeeper, who spotted us from some distance when we were eating the rest of the honey, and tried to stop us by crossing our path. I entered a small patch of young trees which happened to be there rather fortunately, and which was thick enough to restrict all movement to crawling. In there I ordered to change direction, and we left the young woods right by the road. We crossed the road and disappeared into the young woods again. The gamekeeper lost our trail. We stayed on the road because, according to the signposts, it led to Zed, Babica, which happened to be on our route. We approached it when the sun had already set. There were ruins of a castle on top of the hill just before the town. We went around the whole open field before the town from the left side, went across the road between the houses, and headed as the woody hill straight to the ruins of the castle. Here, near the ruins, on the slope of the hill, we lied down covered in the previous year's leaves, terribly tired, and fell asleep. This was Tuesday, April 27th. Edek fell asleep immediately. Jacek and I still had arthritis as a result of the cold bath. On top of that, I suffered from sciatica. I endured the last hour of our march by sheer willpower alone. Apart from the pain in my right hip, I also had a nasty pain in my knees, particularly severe when I was going down the slope. I had to grit my teeth when taking steps. Now, when I was lying down, the pain was not so great, but definitely still bothering me. Jacek did not feel any pain and was able to fall asleep. I could not fall asleep. Taking advantage of sleepless hours, I started to think what to do next. The border between Silesia, which had been incorporated into the Third Reich, and the general government was 8 kilometers away, and we had to cross it. I spent long hours making plans, half asleep, thinking how to get to the border and where to head next. Suddenly, a revelation. I sat up on the leaves so quickly that I hissed from a sudden surge of pain. I recalled year 1942. That was a time when I worked in the carpentry workshop while making spoons in the tannery. My colleague 19, Tadeusz Słowiaczek, worked there as a writer. We talked often, very openly. He told me that he was writing letters to his uncle, who was a parish priest in town, lying astride the border, and that parish priest was allowed to cross the border with a wagon driver. He was also allowed to leave the wagon driver on the other side. We were 7 or 8 kilometers away from the parish of my colleague's uncle. Edek started to talk in his sleep, initially incoherently, but then he asked some Bronek, identity unknown, if he had brought bread for him. He was hungry, so he dreamt about eating at night. Suddenly, he rose up from the ground and asked very loudly, waking up Jacek, "And so, did he bring bread? Who was supposed to bring bread?" Bronek." "Hush now, my dear. You see, here's the forest, the castle, and us sleeping in the leaves. You're dreaming." Edek lied down. Now, I got up in turn. It was 4 a.m. I decided to reach the parish priest in the morning. We did not have a long way to go, but our joints hurt. I was barely able to move my legs with my knees hurting badly. Jacek stood up reluctantly, almost fell down again, and started to slide down the slope. The pain in his knee joints almost caused him to faint. But we got a grip on ourselves. The first steps were hard and painful, especially walking down the slope. These 7 or 8 kilometers took a bit longer, as we could not go in a straight line. Initially, we were moving very slowly then, slightly quicker. Jacek, in order to get some information, as the best-dressed man amongst us, not needing to hide lack of hair on his already bald head, approached a villager going to work and walked with him, chatting. We were approaching town too, Alvernia. A small church was visible on the wooded hill. Jacek left the villager, joined us again, and told us that the town we wanted to get to was matching the area around the hill with the church. Meandering between the fields, finally we reached the road, where the customs office was. The border itself was further on the hill. It was 7 a.m. Several people were already in the office, and they were watching us inquisitively from a distance. Regardless, we crossed the road first, then a small bridge over some brook. We were overseen by people trying to walk as energetically and merrily as possible. Finally, we reached a forested hill, and after climbing many meters on its slope, we collapsed on the ground exhausted. At that moment, as if having waited for us, a bell tolled from the belfry of the church on the hill. Yasho, my dear brother, I'm sorry, but it is you who we need to go to the church, as out of the three of us you look the most respectable, and you can go there without a cap. I sent Yashik to the parish priest, who was supposed to tell him that we were in hell-like place with the priest's brother, Franciszek Słowiaczek, and his two sons, Tadeusz Słowiaczek, and Lolek, Karol Słowiaczek. Yasho went and was gone for a long while. When he finally returned, he was not very happy. He told us that he had to wait for the priest who was about to celebrate Mass, and that he talked to him, but the priest did not believe him. Apparently the priest was afraid of a trap of some kind, but he did not think it would be possible for anyone to escape from Auschwitz. I suspected it. When he saw Yasho's smiling face from year to year, he found difficult to believe that this man, after spending 2.5 years in Auschwitz, managed to escape. I sent Yashik back again, for the Mass might have already ended, and gave him proper and detailed instructions. I told him which relative of the priest I lived in, which block, where the nephews went, at which block they were to be found, and even the content of their letters written last Christmas. Yasho went out again. The Mass had already finished. Then Yasho approached the parish priest and told him everything, adding that he was with 2 colleagues, escapees, who had to remain hidden in the bushes because of their shaved heads and strange clothing. The priest believed him and came with Yasho to us. Here, he threw up his hands and finally believed everything. He returned to us every half an hour, bringing milk, coffee, rolls, bread, sugar, butter, and other delicacies. As it turned out, this was not the right priest. The one we wanted to get to was 2 kilometers further away. This parish priest was no stranger to the other one, and also knew the history of his entire family imprisoned in Auschwitz. He could not take us into his home because too many people were wandering around his courtyard. We enjoyed staying in our spot amidst young sprouses and bushes. The priest gave us some medicinal ointment for our hurting joints. Here, we wrote the first letters to our families, which the priest then posted. In the evening, when it got dark, the priest sent a good guide to us. So, there are still good people in the world, we said to ourselves. This is how Wednesday, April 28th, drew to a close. We bid the priest farewell. Our knees did not hurt much anymore. At 10 p.m., we followed the guide with the intention of crossing the border. The guide took a long, complicated route, doubling back a lot, to finally reach a place where he said, "It's best to do it here." He himself went back. It was possible that it was the best place to cross the border because the area was full of cut trees, wires, and trenches. The border guards must have assumed that nobody would try to cross the border here, and so they guarded other places. It took us about an hour to cross this 150-meter wide belt. It went much quicker after that. The terrain varied, but we mostly stayed by the road. The night was pitch black. We did not have to fear being identified from a distance. There was a risk of encountering a patrol, but alertness and some animal-like instinct led us safely onwards. Sometimes we felt that the way was no longer leading to where we wanted it to go. We would take turns at cutting across fields, following stars at our points of reference, going through woods, falling into gulches, and climbing their slopes. We walked through the night, and we left behind a vast area, or at least so we thought. The first light of the new day found us in some village, which was several kilometers long. The road in the village turned left, while we had to go right, diagonally. Because we spotted our first group of people that day far away on our left, we turned right and went straight ahead through the fields, then through a meadow. The sun had risen. It was Thursday. The area ahead of us was completely open, so crossing it would mean exposing ourselves to risk. We found a huge bush and spent the entire day inside it, not being able to fall asleep. It was not easy to fall asleep in a marsh, sitting on a stone or on the branches of a bush. In the evening, when the sun had set, but one could still see relatively well, Jacek went out to scout ahead. He came back quickly enough, bringing the news that we had the Vistula to our right, and that in order to maintain our current direction, we would have to get across it here. There are boats available and a ferryman who could get us over the other side. We decided to use the ferryman's boat. We left the bushes. We approached the river. The ferryman sized us up with his gaze. We got into the boat, and the boat left the bank. We reached safely the other side. Once the ferryman received payment in marks, he looked at us again in a strange way. 3. The towers of Abbey and Tyniec, and the town of 4, Tyniec itself, were right in front of us. We took the main road through the little town. People were returning home after their day's work. Cows, being late, were hurrying back to their pens. Householders standing by their homes were looking at us, intrigued. We really wanted to eat something and have a hot drink. The nights were cold. The last time I slept was Sunday night in the infirmary in Auschwitz, but we have not decided to enter someone's house just yet. At the end of the little town, an elderly man stood by the gate of his house, looking at us. He seemed so approachable that I asked Edek if he would not mind asking this man for milk. Edek approached the man and asked if he could sell us some milk. The man waved to us. Come, I'll give you milk. In his words there was something not connected with the subject of milk, but he looked so honest that we decided to enter his home. After we came to his house, he introduced us to his family, wife and children. He said, I'm not going to ask you any questions, but you should not be walking around like that. After that, he explained that he himself had been through a lot in the previous war and did not want to know anything. He fed us with hot milk, noodles, eggs, bread, and then offered us his barn as a place to sleep, where he could lock us inside. I know, he said, that you don't know me and might be afraid, so I won't insist, but if you trust me, then stay and be at peace. His face, eyes, and general appearance were so transparently honest that I decided to stay. We spent the night this time in the barn, but locked again. Yet we slept peacefully on the rear pillow given by the host. Pillows like that we have not seen for years. This is how Thursday, April 29th, ended. The host himself opened the door in the morning. Without the assistance of the gendarme, he gave us food, he gave us drink, he talked to our heart's content. We changed the currency. He was an honest, sincere Pole, a patriot. So there are still such humans in the world. His name was 175, Piotr Mazurkiewicz. His whole family was very kind to us. He told them where we were heading from. He wrote, again, letters to our families. It is understood we did not use the addresses known to the camp authorities in Auschwitz. After breakfast, we went on through the fields and woods, leaving 5 and 6 to our left. We headed towards 7, Wieliczka. We spent Friday night in some single hut in a field where a young married couple lived with their children. We arrived late and left before they woke up. We paid and went on our way. We omitted 7, Wieliczka, heading for the forests of 8, Puszcza Niepołomnicka. It was Saturday, May 1st, when we entered the raisin-scented woods. The weather was beautiful, with with the sun casting golden spots on the ground covered with needles from the surrounding conifers. Squirrels were climbing, does were prancing around. Yasha and I took turns in leading the way. Edek was forming the rear guard. Up to now, the day passed without incident. We wanted to eat. Starting from 2 p.m., Yasha was leading the way. We took a broad road, leading us exactly in the direction we wanted to go. Yasha was still leading the way. Around 4 p.m., we approached a wider brook with a bridge over it. Behind the bridge there were some buildings on the left side of the road, gamekeeper's hut and some sheds. To the right, some other buildings. Yasha bravely marched right towards the bridge and the hut. We had been successful for too long, so we stopped being cautious. The lack of any movement and lack of people missiled us, and all the shutters on the hut painted green were closed. Passing by the hut, we took a look at the courtyard behind it, going all the way to the sheds. A German soldier, possibly a gendarme, marched on the courtyard towards us, holding a rifle in his hand. Outwardly, we did not react at all in order to keep marching as long as possible. We were already about 10 steps from the hut. Our reaction was purely instinctive, but the gendarme reacted outwardly. Halt! But we still marched on forward, as we have not heard him. Halt! He yelled again, and now we hear the sound of him reloading his rifle. We stopped, with smiles on our faces. The soldier was behind the courtyard's fence, some 30-35 meters from us. A second soldier quickly emerged from the shed about 50 meters away from us. We said, Ja, alles gut, and we calmly turned around to face them. Seeing our calmness, the first soldier, who already had his weapon ready to fire, lowered the rifle. Upon seeing this, I said calmly, Boys, run! And we all ran off in different directions. Yashik fled to the right, at the angle of 90 degrees of the direction of our march. Edek was running in a dith along the road with the direction of our march, and I jumped right between them, diagonally. It was difficult to describe the way we ran. We all ran the way we could. I jumped over fallen tree trunks and fence of a plant nursery bushes. They were shooting at us many times. I could hear the bullets whizzing right by my head. At a certain moment, I felt shivers in my spine, that someone was aiming at me. Something hit my right arm. I thought, thug, he hit me, but I felt no pain. I kept running quickly, leaving the place behind. Far away to my left, I saw Edek. I called out to him. He saw me, and we started getting closer, running in the same direction. We must have been some 400 meters from the hut, and the soldiers just kept on shooting because they could not see us anymore. I thought they were shooting at Yashik. Maybe they had killed him already. In the meantime, Edek and I were sitting on a fallen tree. I had to dress the bleeding wound. My right arm was shot right through, but the bone was not damaged. Besides, of course, my clothes were torn. The trousers and jacket were pierced in 4 places in total. After bandaging my wound with a handkerchief, we started heading east. Edek wanted us to stay in the hollow by the tree, but I thought that it would be best to leave this place quickly, as the Germans might use the telephone to organize a bigger pursuit. I thought that Yasik might be in trouble, as they had been shooting, but not in our direction. An hour later, we reached some village. We said outright that we were boys from the forest, that there were 3 of us, but only 2 remained. They heard the gunshots. Maybe our friend was killed. These kind people gave us milk and bread and a guide to lead us to the ferry. We took the ferry to the other side of the river and found ourselves in some larger village with a church. A bunch of German soldiers were there as well, but they paid no attention to us whatsoever, looking for food and probably thinking we were locals. Finally, having left the village, we spotted the town of Bochnia, in the distance the closest destination of our march. Because the home of 164 Edmund Zabawski's family was on the other side of the town, and it was already 7:30. The curfew was from 8 p.m. here. I did not want to walk through the town because of how we looked. Edek and I decided to stay in the attic of a local's houses, which we reached by going around the town's perimeter from the north and east. In the morning, on the 2nd of May, we started our journey. We were very close now, to see Mr. and Mrs. 176 Józef and Teofila Obora. We approached their house and saw an elderly couple on the porch, the in-laws of 164 Edmund Zabawski, a young lady, his wife, and their daughter, Marysia. The hosts greeted us cordially and, no questions asked, invited us inside. We introduced ourselves as 164's colleagues. The hosts invited us further into the rooms, where, upon opening the door, we saw a bed and Yasho sleeping soundly. We woke him up and hugged him heartily. Yasho, dressed properly, arrived in town the previous evening. This explained the host's behavior, who did not ask any questions and invited us with a smile. Yasho had already told them everything. Yasho's clothes and his bundle were pierced by bullets in several places, but he himself was not hurt. My wound was not serious. All is well that ends well. We all made it. Mr. and Mrs. 176, Józef and Teofila Obora, and Madame 177, Helena Zabawska, gave us an exceptionally cordial and hospitable reception. In fact, such as one can only hope from one's own family, and that after a long period of separation. We should repeat several times a day that there are still people like this in this world. The tales of our experiences in Auschwitz with our dear colleague and their beloved relative 164, Edmund Zabawski, were met with great interest, cordiality, and kindness. After the first meeting and winning each other's trust by exchanging the agreed passwords, I asked to be contacted with someone from the military underground. A few hours later, I was already talking to Leon, 178, Leon Vandasiewicz, with whom I yet again exchanged passwords and asked to be contacted with the commander of the local outpost. Colleague Leon presented me with two options of speaking with two gentlemen. One gentleman was from the northern area, 9, Bochnia, and the second one living in the town 10, Nowy Wiśnicz, 7 kilometers away from here, was the leader of the southern area. I said that it did not matter to me. Colleague Leon proposed to me visiting the commander from 10, Nowy Wiśnicz, as he was a colleague of his. I was the guest of Mr. and Mrs. 176, Józef and Teofila Obora, on Sunday and Monday, 2nd and 3rd of May. On Tuesday, 4th of May, in the morning, dressed in the proper clothing of one of Leon's colleagues, I went with him to 10, Nowy Wiśnicz. Yasho and Edek had still remained as guests at 176 Józef and Teofila Obora's place. It was a beautiful sunny day. We walked and talked cheerfully. Colleague Leon had a bike with him, which he intended to use to get back home, as he suspected that I will stay as a guest at Commander's house. Whilst walking, I thought about all the unexpected situations that I had been through over these past years, and now they all finished, and yet fate still had one great surprise in store for me. When we were more or less halfway there, we sat down in some copse to rest. Out of curiosity, I asked colleague Leon about the name of the commander of the outpost where we were headed, as I was to meet him soon anyhow. Leon uttered 2 words, saying the name and the surname. Those 2 words for others would be perfectly normal. For me, they were a shocking discovery. It was rather weird and uncanny occurrence, a strange coincidence. The commander's name was exactly the same as the one I had been using all these years in Auschwitz. So it was his identity that I was using every day of my stay in that hell, and he knew nothing about it. And now, my road was leading me to him, to the owner of that name. Was it fate? Blind fate? If it was really only fate, then it surely was not blind. I was speechless. I went quiet. Colleague Leon asked me, "Why aren't you saying anything?" "Oh, it's nothing. I'm just a bit tired." I was just counting the days that I had spent in Auschwitz. The number of my days in that hell behind wire was 947, almost 1,000. "Let's hurry," I said. "You and the commander of this place are in for an unusual surprise." "If so, then let's go." We were approaching the beautiful town of Nowy Vishnich, located among valleys and hills with a picturesque castle on the hill. Whilst walking, I was thinking, well, yes, I was fictitiously born here in Bochnia. 158, Zygmunt Warzyński came here one time to settle a matter regarding me with Reverend 160, Franciszek Kutz. A gentleman, along with his wife and daughters, was sitting on a veranda of a house surrounded by a garden. We approached them. Colleague Leon whispered to him that he could speak freely. I introduced myself using the name that I had been using in Auschwitz. He replied, "So am I." "But I am Tomasz Serafiński," I said. "I'm Tomasz Serafiński as well," he replied, surprised. Leon was listening to this conversation in bewilderment. His wife was watching me as well. But I was born on, here I say the day, the month, and the year, which I had to repeat in Auschwitz so many times over the course of these years at every change of the block or the commando, whilst the capos were making their lists. The man almost jumped. "Sir, what is going on? These are my personal details." "Yes, sir, there are your personal details, but I have lived through so much more than you whilst using them." And I told him about my stay in Auschwitz that lasted for 2 years and 7 months, and now I escaped there. Different people could perhaps react differently. My namesake and the owner of the surname which I had been using for ages opened his arms. We hugged each other cordially and immediately became friends. "But how did it happen?" asked my namesake. I asked him if he knew Madame Dr. 83, Helena Pawłowska, from Warsaw. Yes, he lived there and his ID was prepared for him at the place, but he had left before the card was ready. Later on, I put this card to use as one of my many fake IDs that I used to have at that time. I spent 3.5 months staying with Mr. and Mrs. 179, Tomasz and Ludmiła Serafiński. Through some colleagues, we sent a message to Reverend 160, Władysław Kutz, asking him to erase once such a necessary piece of information written in pencil in the parish register next to my namesake's name. Here I was organizing a troop with the help of 84, Tomasz Serafiński, and 180, ANDRZEJ, with eventuality of launching an assault on Auschwitz, engaging the colleagues from inside the camp as well, if the acceptance of my plan will come from Warsaw. My colleague 180, Andrzej Możdżeń, and I had some weapons and German uniforms. I wrote a letter to the family to my colleague 25, Stefan Bielecki, who was once dispatched with a report when fleeing from Auschwitz, and was now working in one of the departments in the High Command. I wrote a letter to 11, Warsaw, to 44, Wincenty Gawron, who was also dispatched with a report during his escape from Auschwitz, intending to get in touch for the benefit of our further work. My colleague 25, Stefan Bielecki, came from Warsaw on June 1st, bringing me valuable news. Madame E.O. Eleonora Ostrowska, the addressee of my letters from Auschwitz, fortunately still lived in the same apartment. The Gestapo only threatened the family of the escapees. They had no reason to persecute someone they thought to be a mere acquaintance. They had no way of finding my family, nor did they know the name. 25, Stefan Pilecki, also brought me an ID card and some money. I discussed the matter with him, explaining that I was not going to leave for Warsaw just yet, hoping that they would allow me to attack Auschwitz from the outside now. However, if there would be direct ban for attacking Auschwitz, then I would go to Warsaw. The colleague, a bit sad that he was going back home alone despite having promised the family to bring me with him, left for Warsaw. On June 5th, a local Gestapo officer and an SS man from Auschwitz came to Tomek Serafiński, my namesake's mother, asking about her son's whereabouts. She told them that he had been living in the vicinity for many years. They came to Tomek. I was already very close by then. The SS man must have been informed by the local Gestapo officer that 84 Tomasz Serafiński has been around here for a long time. He'd just look at his face and at the paper held in his hand, probably comparing it with my photograph with puffed out cheeks. Asked if there was a chance of any fruit in the autumn and left. During my work in 10, Nowe Wiśnicz, I met really first class and worthy Poles, not only Mr. and Mrs. 179, the Serafiński, but also Mr. 181, Józef Roman. Later on, colleague 25, Stefan Pilecki, sent me a parcel from Warsaw with the latest means on fighting the invaders, and a letter in which he said that the underground authorities looked very favorably. Reading this, I was shocked, presuming that he meant the Auschwitz action. But further were the following words. On the prospect of decorating me for my work in Auschwitz, my colleagues still hoped that they would give their permission to attack Auschwitz, though. In July, I received a letter with truly tragic news. General Grot spearhead Stefan Rowecki has been arrested. Seeing how intense the situation in Warsaw was, I came to understand that I could not possibly wait for the answer regarding Auschwitz any longer, and decided to go to Warsaw. I arrived in Warsaw on August 23rd. Jasio, ANDRZEJ, came in September, Edek, Edward Ciesielski, in December. In Warsaw, I worked in one of the units at HQ. I kept presenting the situation of our colleagues remaining in Auschwitz and the necessity of conducting an operation there to the appropriate authorities. I found out that 161, Bolesław Kutbara, during his imprisonment in Pawiak, revealed the identity of the leaders of the organization in Auschwitz. Since then, he worked for Germans. He was released from Pawiak and walked around with a gun, but was soon eliminated in Napoleon Square. I stayed in touch by exchanging letters with my Auschwitz colleagues via their families outside the camp. I tried to offer them moral support, but did not think it was enough. Not long after that, I received the news that, maybe because of 161 Bronisław Kutbara's testimony, a whole group of colleagues from Auschwitz, all high-ranking in our organization, were shot dead. I saw the name of Westrich Wilhelm on the list of those who were to be executed by Khedive. He used to save me one time in Auschwitz. I knew him to be a thug, but even if I wanted to change something in his case, it was already too late, and there was a note next to his name, executed on. I met Sławomir Szpakowski, in the street one day. Back in Auschwitz, we used to quarry rocks with pickaxes together, dreaming about being invited over by him for dinner in Warsaw. We were both optimists, and, as people put it, we were thinking unrealistically, and yet we did meet again, both in Warsaw, both alive. He was carrying a package of some kind and almost dropped it when he saw me. I have eaten many dinners with him since. Then, according to the menu that we thought up back there in hell. I lived in the same house from which I was taken to Auschwitz in 1940, and to the address of which I was writing the letters to Miss E.O. Eleonora Ostrowska, only one floor above. It was the sorts of a certain sense of achievement challenging the authorities like that. Nobody even visited Mrs. E.O. Nobody even asked any questions about my disappearance from Auschwitz. Jasio, ANDRZEJ's sister, and Edek Edward Ciesielski's family were also left undisturbed. I presented the plan of action in Auschwitz, the chief of planning Kediv's action, Wilk, Wolf, Zygmunt, Major Karol Jabłoński, in autumn 1943. He told me, when the war is over, I'll show you a file full of documents regarding Auschwitz, where we have all the reports that had been ever written, including yours. I wrote the last report on Auschwitz on typewriter, 20 pages long. The last page contained the statements of all the colleagues who carried my reports. They wrote for me by hand what, to whom, and when they reported it. I collected 8 of these statements, for the rest of the colleagues were either dead or away from Warsaw. A part of being busy in one of the departments of the HQ, I was also taking care of the families of those prisoners of Auschwitz who were either still alive and imprisoned or dead. Colleague 86, Alexander Pilecki, was helping me with that. Money for the benefits of the prisoners and their families were coming through a well-organized unit formed of 3 ladies, 182, identity unknown, who dedicated a lot of time to help the prisoners and their families. One day, I was informed by those ladies that there was a man whose operation area included Auschwitz. The man was a pistol, and he was running excellent operations, and through him we may be able to reach the prisoners in Auschwitz, as recently the contact with them had broken down. This gentleman was about to leave, and I could not see him any more. However, as he was known to be effective and claimed that he could get in touch with inmates, I wanted to make it easier for him and gave him the name of a colleague of mine, Murzyn, Leon Murzyn, a prisoner of Auschwitz. I told him to mention the name of Tomasz Serafiński, who had left the camp at Easter. Among the trusted colleagues I met, few times several inmates from Auschwitz who, to me, were not trustworthy. They had been released earlier, and those claimed that I had been released as well. On 10th of June, 1944, on Marszałkowska Street, someone suddenly opened his arms and said, "I don't believe that they let you out of Auschwitz." I replied that I could not believe that he had been released either. It was Oleg, 167, Aleksander Bugajski. That lucky beggar, like a cat, always lands on 4 paws. He had managed to get himself into the transport to Ravensbrück as a doctor in the SK and escaped from the camp. The ladies, 182, identity unknown, informed me that the gentleman working near Auschwitz was going there again and asked to see me. I rushed to the meeting. I came a couple of minutes earlier before the man's arrival. The ladies discreetly stayed in another room waiting for the outcome of the meeting of 2 aces. I waited for a while, waiting for some genius to arrive. The door opened and a tiny ball rolled in, small, bald, with a pug nose. Well, one's appearance gives no grounds for judging a man, does it? We sat down, and the gentleman began the conversation like this. "And what if I took a wooden plank and painted a black man on it, and walk up to the fence of Auschwitz with that plank with a black man drawn on it?" I stood up, apologized, and approached the ladies. "Who did you put me in contact with? Can he be taken seriously?" "Oh, yes, he can. He's a great organizer, and here they gave his military rank. I came back thinking that this was perhaps his way of starting conversations and promised myself to be patient. When I took my place at the table, the gentleman, seeing that I was not particularly fond of the idea of a black man on a plank, or maybe not a black man, maybe a St. Thomas or a Easter bunny cake. I was choking on my internal laughter, and I thought I was going to break the chair, squeezing it so hard with both hands till I felt the pain just to avoid bursting out laughing. Finally, I stood up and said that, much to my regret, this conversation was not going to reach its conclusion, for I was already late someplace else. I'm not making this up. This is precisely what happened. At the end of July 1944, a week before the uprising, somebody stopped me when I was riding a bike down Filtrova Street shouting, "Hello." I stopped reluctantly, as was always the case during the underground work. Some gentleman approached me, and I failed to recognize him, but only for a second. It was my colleague from Auschwitz, Captain 116, Zygmunt Pawlowicz. Jacek, ANDRZEJ, and I took part in the uprising in the same sector. The description of our actions and my colleague's death is described in the history of the 1st Battalion of the Chrobry 2nd Unit. Edward Ciesielski got shot 5 times, but fortunately made it without any severe consequences. During the uprising, my colleague 25, Stefan Bielecki, was heavily wounded. During the course of the uprising, I also met a colleague of mine, 44, Vincente Gavron. Later on, somewhere else, I met colleagues who were in Auschwitz almost till the very end, January 1945. 183, identity unknown, and 184, identity unknown. I was very pleased to hear about the aftermath of our escape via the bakery. The entire camp laughed at the camp's authorities, for we fooled them well, and there were no repercussions against the colleagues who remained, except for the SS men who guarded us, who had to spend some time in the bunker. I provide here the number of people who had died in Auschwitz. When I was leaving Auschwitz, the latest registration number was slightly over 121,000. The living ones, those who had left the camp in a transport or were released, counted about 23,000. About 97,000 prisoners that had been recorded and numbered died. This has nothing to do with the people who were gassed and burned in great masses without ever being registered. According to the daily calculations of the inmates who had worked near the commando, over 2 million of those people had died by the time of my escape from Auschwitz. I was giving these numbers cautiously, not to overstate the figures. Exact numbers given on a daily basis should be properly discussed. My colleagues who spent more time there and witnessed about 8,000 people being gassed every day quote the figure of give or take 5 million people. Now I wanted to say something in general about what I felt when I was back among the living. Back from a place about which one could say, who entered had died, who left had been born again. What impression did I have? Not of the best ones, or the most wicked ones, but in general, of the entire mass of people I encountered upon having returned to Earth. Sometimes I had the impression that I was walking around a big house, and I accidentally opened the door to a room full of children. Oh, the children are playing. Yes, the leap was too great between what we thought to be important and what other people think is important. What was their worries? What was their joy? But this is not all. All too visible for me these days was some kind of common deceit. It was so visible to me, some kind of destructive work which was aiming to blur the boundary between truth and falsehood. The truth became so flexible that it was stretched to cover many inconvenient things. The line between honesty and falsehood was faithfully faded away. That is not what is important. What I have written so far on these several dozens of pages, especially for those who will be reading them only as a sensation. But here, I'd like to write with such capital letters, which are unfortunately not present on a typewriter. For all those heads which have under their beautiful parting just water, and they perhaps can be thankful to their mothers for well-formed skulls, so that water is not running out of their heads. Let them think deeper about their own lives. Let them look around the people and start the battle for themselves against falsity, hypocrisy, against interest, cleverly and conveniently adjusted for the idea, the truth, and even the huge issue. In the Polish Underground Movement Study Trust archives in London, there is a sheet of paper with an undated note written by Witold Pilecki. There is not enough time for me to finish this work now. Anyway, 3 Auschwitz inmates managed to flee safely and joined the Chrobry 2nd Unit in Warsaw Uprising of 1944. The records of the 1st Battalion of the Chrobry 2 Unit are kept in the Historical Office of St. Giorgio.